you get so big getting hold of this kind?
Hello and welcome into my review of this second episode of Star Wars The Mandalorian. This is going to be a spoiler review, so if you have not watched the show, please be aware that I'm going to spoil everything that has been going on thus far. And with that, I'll go ahead and say that this is titled The Mandalorian Chapter 2, The Child. It actually had a subtitle this time, and of course it had The Child because... oh my gosh, my new favorite person in the entire world. I have named him or her Yodel, and Yodel has my whole heart. Yodel is my favorite, and Yodel is the best, and Yodel is a very good boy or girl, and I'm so excited to see more of this character. But I will get to Yodel a little bit more in a minute. So, this episode was amazing. It was action-packed, it was funny, it was all sorts of crazy universe building. So far, this show has been absolutely not at all what I expected. And while at the same time being absolutely what I expected, I don't know exactly what it's managed to do, but it has been a bounty hunting show, and he has been really cool and fighty and getting into scrapes and shooting off his flamethrower and all of these things. But it's just been this different kind of wonderful world while going along with it. There's been a lot of heart in the show. Nick Nolte's character has added so much, and I was really glad to see him back in this episode. This episode also had my other favorite thing in the Star Wars universe, and that is Jawas. I love Jawas. I really love Jawas. I'm the person that when I play The Force Unleashed, like, I run around decidedly not killing any of the Jawas because I can't stand to do it because I love Jawas. It was actually kind of sad to watch a couple of them die, but it was an amazing action sequence where Mando is like hanging on to the sandcrawler and running around, and just the comedic beats in that were hilarious. Like, they slammed the door on his fingers, and then he'd have to run up, or he makes it up, and then like 20 of them shoot him at once, and he falls over. And it was a little bit more slapsticky than it was in the first episode, but at the same time, it's not slapsticky. Like, it wasn't silly. He was just in a fight, but he was in a fight against 20 tiny, like, freakish desert ghost people. Like, they're Jawas are Jawas, what are you gonna do? So far, I really like that he's a very good, very capable fighter, and we see that, but he's also not so completely overpowered. Part of that is he doesn't have his full set of armor yet. I'm presuming his helmet is Beskar, I'm assuming his helmet is correct, and then he has the pauldron. But the rest of it is just armor pieces that he's put together. He's not in his full stuff. That's why he needs to do this job, because he needs to get his armor. And we see that armor fall apart, that it seems kind of cheap. The different scrapes he gets into, it kind of comes apart, and that's just kind of a sign of how good of a fighter he really is, that he can be in this subpar armor and make it. But you also get the idea of his limitations in this episode, and it was really well done. Nick Nolte's character was great. He doesn't cut the Mandalorian any kind of slack while at the same time being completely kind and understanding to him. They have a really cool dynamic between the two of them so far. I really hope that's not the end of his character in the show, but it is a little hard to tell. After all, there are several characters that we were promised, one such as Cara Dune, who has not yet appeared. So it's distinctly possible that these characters that we have been hearing about are only going to show up for a couple episodes. Mind you, the first season in its entirety is only 8 episodes. We are 1/4 of the way through the show. You know, it's distinctly possible that we'll see more or not see more of the different characters. This scrape with the big furry, like, it looked like a furry reek, basically, to get the egg was amazing. And then I love the Jawas themselves as they freak out about the egg. And at first I was like, well, maybe the egg is going to be metaphorical, and it's like, nope, this is an actual egg from an actual creature. And then they, like, just bust the egg open outside of the sandcrawler, and they're just eating it and having this crazy party. And that looked stellar because everything was so brown and muddy and grungy, and then you open up the egg and it's this bright yellow, and they're eating it, and it was really dramatic. I also found it interesting, right at the beginning of the episode, we see 2 bounty hunters. These are the bounty hunters we have seen him fight in some of the trailer material, but now we get the context of what they're fighting about, and they are fighting about my current favorite thing in the whole entire universe, which is my little green friend over here. This little kid is just my new adopted child. Like, just is my child now. I loved how it's just like floating around and the little pod the entire time. There was just something amazing about that, and like the Mando can control it from his wrist gauntlet, which answers the question I had from the previous episode. I didn't know, like, was the baby using the Force to levitate the pod, or could the pod just levitate? It was, of course, the pod can just levitate, and just you know, the little kid, like, right around, and, like, he's just happily sitting there while the Mando fights off the Trandoshans, and then happily sitting there when he's, like, keeping up with the Sandcrawler. I just thought it was so cute. I think one of my favorite parts, too, is the Mando's sitting there and he's trying to fix his armor, he's trying to tend his wound, and, like, the little guy, like, crawls out of the pod and keeps coming up to him and wants to, like, use the Force to help heal him, is what I'm presuming is happening. But he sees, like, the Mando is his protector and his friend, and he wants to come over and help him. And, like, the little squee noises he makes and the way he runs around was so cute. And they get to Nick Nolte's house, and he's, like, chasing after the frog and, like, eats the frog, which was, that was just, like, the most classic kid moment of, like, hey, get that out of your mouth, and he just swallows it. I loved it all. But then you get to the big fight with the rhino thing, and there's the moment where we actually see the baby use the Force. It's kind of funny because I legitimately texted a friend of mine while I was at work yesterday and was like, hey, how crazy would it be if the Mandalorian and the baby were, like, trapped and the baby, like, freaked out and used the Force to wreck something? And then it happened in this episode, and I was like, I was so happy. I love that, and I love the way, like, he just, like, passed out. It was so well balanced, this idea that the baby could use the Force and do this big intense thing instinctually, but that the baby was wrecked, like, just so tired after that. And that fits pretty well. We've seen more and more new canon people doing big expressions of the Force instinctually from a survivor's standpoint, but that it takes so much energy out of them, or maybe just the sheer amount of power they're using takes so much out of them that they have to rest. So I thought that was a really good balanced thing where we can see that this kid has access to the Force, but it's not going to be like some super all-powerful being. Like, he or she's going to be able to do things, but it's going to tucker them out. And it does make sense. I mean, the kid is a baby, but is 50 years old. And I like that we're kind of seeing this, you know, the kid can walk, and the kid has this emotional intelligence for what's going on with the Mandalorian, can access the Force, but is still in toddler form. And I really like the way we're seeing this play out. And then, of course, the kid wakes up at the end. The Mandalorian is off to complete the job, which is probably going to mean that next week he's going to have to start making some decisions. Now, what exactly the kid means is a big thing. So at this point, I'm going to kind of slide into speculation zone. If you want to stay away from speculation, stay away from any kind of spoilers, I would recommend stopping now. I don't read leaks, I don't get into rumors and that sort of thing, but there has been some very, very specific observations made that I want to talk about now, that if you want to stay completely blind to, you want to step away. But at the same time, like I said, it is not a leak, it is not anything. This is all people connecting dots from perfectly legitimately released production information. So the first thing I want to talk about is actually a line of dialogue from the previous episode. IG-11 is standing there staring at baby Yodel and says something to the effect of, we'll never know, as in how old the child can live, because my instructions are to terminate the child, which is very different from what the Mandalorian's orders were. The Mandalorian was asked to bring in the child alive. The scientist fellow wanted him brought in alive, and Herzog's character is like, if he's dead, we understand. Bounty hunting is a complicated profession. So Mando was told, you know, if it's dead, it's fine, but please bring him in alive. IG-11 was told something completely different. And so I think what we have here is going to become a warring Imperial factions. So we see Herzog's character. We've also seen in trailers Moff Gideon, played by another actor by the name of Esposito, and it's my gut instinct that he is going to be the one who either hired IG-11 or some of the other bounty hunters, and he's going to be in on this and want the child dead. It's very possible that Herzog wants the child dead regardless and is just using the scientist, but we'll see. But I think what we're about to see is Imperial factions at each other's throat. Somebody pointed out in the comments of one of my previous videos on this, the show is taking place 5-6 years after Return of the Jedi. It's after the book Star Wars Aftermath, Empire's End, which is a little bit further than I thought the show was taking place, but it's just my own fault for not knowing when that takes place. But it's certainly a time of Imperial warlords and those folk not getting along super well. So that's where I think a lot of these bounty hunters are coming from, that there's at least 2, if not more, Imperial factions looking for this very mysterious child. Obviously, this is a member of Yoda's species. You know, there was no way to know for sure if the kid was going to be force sensitive. I would have been more surprised if the kid wasn't force sensitive than if the kid was. Besides the age and the iconography of the species, I didn't see much point in having the species without it being force sensitive, but it was, we didn't know where they were gonna go with it. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is a tweet from a buddy of mine, Marv. You know Marv of Happy Birthday Marv fame, for those of you who watched my Star Wars Celebration videos. He tweeted out something with partial credit to bhower1138 on Twitter. They had made some observations about the scientist who was looking for baby Yodel. You can see a patch on the scientist's shirt, which again has been very officially released. This is not a leak or anything, and it matches the Kaminoan emblem that the clones wore in Star Wars Attack of the Clones. So it appears this scientist has ties to Kamino. And this could mean a couple of different things. One, it could mean that he just stole somebody's shirt. I mean, technically, we have not been given any kind of information that guarantees that it's even this guy's shirt. We only see a partial of the emblem. Maybe there's something more to it. So this is, like I said, this is not a confirmation thing. This is just piecing stuff together. It could be a Kaminoan shirt, and he could be a Kaminoan scientist that has nothing to do with cloning. Presumably, they had scientists there that did other things as well. But in the event things are exactly what they appear to be, he could be a scientist interested in the topic of cloning, which means some very interesting things for our little green friend. It means one of two things. Either he wants to clone our friend, or our friend is a clone. Now, in the case of Yodel is not a clone. Yodel is Yodel, and he wants to clone Yodel. That's short, sweet, to the point. I mean, that just is what it is. Powerful Force sensitives are kind of gone from the galaxy. Kylo Ren, Ben Solo, is alive, but young, not really on the rise. We don't really know what Snoke is doing at this point. We don't know enough about what Palpatine's plans are going to be in The Rise of Skywalker to know what he's up to, but it's not that far out there to think of Imperials wanting to find a member of Yoda's species, especially a Force-sensitive member of Yoda's species, to start cloning somebody very, very powerful. That is the most simple theory, that simply a cloner is looking for the child to do cloning. Now, there's also the case in which the child is already a clone. In my opinion, if the child is a clone, then the child is most likely a clone of Yoda. I don't see how it would be anything else. We only know two other canon members of Yoda's species, one being Yoda, one being Yaddle. They could clone Yaddle, to the extent that this show is already dealing with, like, really deep Mandalorian lore and that sort of thing. It's possible you wouldn't have to explain it to the more in-depth fan who Yoda is, or who Yaddle is, in order to do that. It's possible. I'm not going to rule it out. But if of the two, if you were going to clone a Jedi Master, would you clone a Jedi Master, or would you clone the former Grand Master of the Jedi Order? It would just make sense to do that with Yoda, but that also could be my own personal biases. Now, 50 years ago is an interesting thing. Several people have pointed out that 50 years prior to when the show takes place is about approximately 41 years before the Battle of Yavin, which is also the same birth year as Anakin Skywalker, which could be a massive coincidence or not a coincidence at all. What it is also is around the time that the clone army is being developed. In Attack of the Clones, we get the line that Obi-Wan says, Master Sifo-Dyas was killed almost 10 years ago. Sifo-Dyas, in current canon, did order the clone army, so the clone army would have been killed, or the clone army would have been ordered or commissioned at least like a year-ish before the kid would have been born, so that would kind of track along the same time too. However, if the kid is also a clone, now you bring in the element of growth acceleration. The kid could be 50 years old biologically. That doesn't mean the kid is 50 years old. It could mean the kid is 25, if he has the same kind of growth acceleration that the clone has, or our clone, like Star Wars clones, the clone troopers have. Or he could have any kind of growth acceleration at all. He could have growth deceleration for all we know. So once you bring in clones, the exact birth year gets a little fuzzy. We only know the kid's current biological age. We don't know his or her aging rate. But it certainly brings in a lot of thoughts. It's also a big deal because in Legends lore, you could not clone Force-sensitive people without them going a little crazy. Most Jedi who were cloned, their clones became very dark side, and that comes as early as the Thrawn trilogy. So, they could either just ignore that entirely, or that could mean some consequences for our little friend, or our little friend could not be a clone. Could just be another member of Yoda species that they are seeking to clone. Or it could be nothing to do with cloning at all. I don't know. I just know that it's really interesting and really fascinating. One thing with that I thought was odd was it does not seem that the Mandalorian or Nick Nolte's character, the Ugnaught, have any idea what the Force is. That part isn't necessarily the odd part. It doesn't surprise me that the Mandalorian doesn't know. More surprised that the Ugnaught doesn't know, that Nick Nolte doesn't know. But the reason really why I say that is I assumed the reason why the Mandalorian rescues Yodel and so firmly wants to protect Yodel is because he recognizes that he is a member of Yoda's species and could be like Yoda, and therefore know his potential. Instead is completely surprised. So this is nice. This means that the Mandalorian literally saved Yodel out of the kindness of his heart because he thinks he's protecting a child, but means that he has no idea the power of the person with him. So that kind of adds this element of mystery and an element where we, the audience, have a little bit better idea of what this kid could be capable of. Even if he wasn't a member of Yoda's species, just knowing what a Force-sensitive person can do is really interesting. Now, I could just go on and on and on and on about Yodel all day long, but there's some other stuff I'd like to see now that we've had 2 episodes. In the first episode, we saw more with Mandalorian culture. This episode made some references to Mandalorian culture. He won't trade his armor to the Jawas. And he says, having my gun is part of my religion, which could just be a quip. Like, that might not be serious, but just referencing to, like, as a Mandalorian, these are things that are important to me is interesting. And it will be good to see more of that. I talked about in my spoiler review how we learned that he was a foundling. Some of what I was saying there was just drawing conclusions based off of what the text was presenting us, but the idea that he was a foundling too, and that he doesn't have a full set of armor because he's never had the materials by which to do it. I think that's part of where his bond with a little baby Yodel comes from, that he's seeing another child kind of abandoned and lost in the way he was abandoned and lost, and having us kind of come to see and feeling that kind of intrinsic bond with him there. The armorer mentions that, his signet hasn't been revealed, but will be soon. I think that's something that we'll kind of get over the course of this episode. But what's going to become a big deal is, of course, turning in Yodel is how he gets his armor. And we've seen him, there are pictures of him in his, fully done armor in some of the promotional materials for the show. So we know he gets it eventually. So does that mean he turns in Yodel? Does that mean he turns in Yodel and regrets it and gets Yodel back? Does it mean he just turns in Yodel and Yodel is trapped and we don't get to know what happens? Does it mean he doesn't turn in Yodel at all, and in the course of these Imperial factions fighting each other, he picks up the materials for himself and gets his armor anyway? And I think that we're going to get more of this idea of Mandalorian culture, and it's going to tie into the decisions he makes with Yodel going forward. But I gotta tell you guys, we had been covering The Mandalorian on this channel. We had done a hype stream with my buddy, Official Bendu, who also has a Star Wars channel that you guys should check out. I was excited because I was excited for Star Wars live action. I'd been waiting for Star Wars live action TV since 2005 when Lucas had first started talking about making a show. I am excited to see Star Wars played on screen. I was pretty much of the mind of, Mandalorians are cool. There's some Mandalorians I like, but I've never been a big Mando fan. I don't dislike them, but they're not like my beating heart, Bounty hunters, there are bounty hunters I like, but I'm not that big in bounty hunter culture. I'm not that big into underworld culture. I find it interesting, but I find it interesting as a setting, but not the main topic. So I was pretty much of the mind of, Mandalorian's gonna be a good show. I'm gonna enjoy it. I'm gonna enjoy weekly Star Wars. It's not going to be made for me, but I'm still going to have fun, and I'm so glad that it's going to exist for all the people that have really wanted a show like this. Little did I know that they would literally make a show. I don't know that I've ever watched anything that was, more made for me than the second episode of The Mandalorian. Just having a guy go around and, fight Jawas, and, to have Jawas look so cool and so funny and so awesome, and to see Jawas getting such love on screen. Meanwhile, his sidekick is, a little baby version of Yoda following him around in a floating pod, and, he's teaming up with him. In my wildest dreams, I would never have imagined that I would get something like this. So I am really, really losing my mind at how much I love this show. And even the the bounty hunter stuff that I'm not as interested in is presented in such a way that I'm really enjoying it. But, like, I cannot get over my child Yodel, like, at all. He's my favorite little good boy or girl, as I'm sure we'll find out eventually, and I will defend them with my whole heart and everything that I can. Well, that's what I have to say about this episode. Let me know what your thoughts are. What are your theories? What do you think of some of the theories I've presented here? If you're not already, please follow us on all of the socials. I love discussing theories with you guys. Please, I'm not interested in leaks, so if you have any information that's based on a leak or a rumor, not interested in that. But if you find any other kind of in-text based evidence, absolutely let me know about that, and we can chat about that. And until next time, keep it real and fly casual.
Cooking can be fun!